Well, welcome back to the shop and to the channel. I have an interesting project here in the shop on the workbench here. Now, this is going to be essentially a disassembly and clean and reassembly, but I think what I have in front of me is at least a little bit interesting. Now, I bought this at auction hoping it was a 10-inch rotary table. There was really no way for me to know what size it was based on the photos, and there really wasn't a decent description, but I saw that it had a power feed on it, and I thought that was interesting enough to take a look at and then bid on it. I did win, obviously, but when I went to go pick it up, I realized it was a 12-inch, and essentially that's not really that much of a problem. Really, the problem is I'm getting to the age, if I'm not there already, in which lifting a 12-inch rotary table on and off the mill is just a little bit too much for me to be able to do alone. And I really don't have a good way of moving this thing around in the shop without some help. But it is pretty crusty and it needs a little bit of help. So what I'm going to do here in this video is take this thing apart, and we'll see if we have time to put it back together. This might end up getting split into two videos. We'll see. But I think I'm going to take it apart, clean everything out, and I don't think there's anything on it that's broken, except for maybe the power feed. The power feed's acting a little funky, but I think I can fix that. And then I'm just going to end up putting this up for sale, because any money I make on this will go into working on the 13-inch South Bend lathe that is really my focus for the shop for now. Now, the adapter here for this servo power feed is obviously shop made, but I think it's interesting enough to keep it. I did try to see if I could find the parts to convert it back, and I didn't have any immediate luck, so I'm just going to leave it as is. Well, first things first, I need to take this power feed off of this adapter, and this is no different than how this would have been mounted to a Bridgeport. As a matter of fact, it looks like all of this hardware here on the front is Bridgeport hardware. That's a Bridgeport handle, and of course the dial and the lock nut. So I suspect that what I'm going to find here is all of the pieces that I would use to attach this to a Bridgeport. This is a Servo 150, which I think would be suitable for a Bridgeport X or Y feed. I don't think it would be powerful enough for the Z-axis, the knee up and down. So I suppose worst case scenario, if I am not able to find a new home for this thing, maybe I'll just take the servo power feed off of this and stick it on the Y-axis of my mill. With the handle and the dial off, there's these shims here. These are necessary to keep the power feed from binding up on the dial. And then this drive gear slides off next. And then underneath the drive gear is another pack of shims that we'll have to make sure that we don't lose any of those. Those will be necessary to put this all back together. But before those shims can come out, I need to remove this woodruff key. Next are these 4 socket head cap screws that hold the power feed onto the shaft. And then there's this spacer here that the bearings for the servo ride on. And it looks like there's a little burr where the handle extension is. And I think I'll just grab a stone and try to knock down those burrs, and that should let me get the spacer off of here. There are 4 socket head cap screws that hold this extension onto the rotary table. Of course, I think the obvious conclusion is that this extension was put on here to move the servo out away from the table, so you'd have some more flexibility, as well as it not getting in the way of any of the table controls on whatever milling machine this happens to be mounted to. I am coming to the conclusion here that this is going to be a lot easier to take off if this part of the rotary table is not mounted to the base. So I think I'm going to change gears here and try to pull out the worm gear from the rotary table and take this apart in a little more convenient manner. Well, to remove the worm drive, I need to remove this very large screw that mounts it to the base of the rotary table. So now the trick is how do I get this thing out? It's in there pretty tight. So I have a piece of 1/8 inch angle which fits in the slot fairly well. I just need to get enough leverage on it to get it to turn. Well, that didn't work, so I'm trying a longer piece of angle and a hammer to see if I can't impact it a little bit and loosen it up. Well, I didn't notice this set screw here in the base, and I would imagine that's what's holding that screw from being able to be turned. So let me get this out of here and we'll try that again. Only try standing it up on edge. Maybe it'll give me a little bit more leverage, and see if I can't use the angle iron and impact technique here with the hammer, and that's not really working either. Well, of course I'm going to have to try a little heat. Well, we'll try this again with the longer piece of angle, and this is not working still. So I think we're going to have to think of this a little bit differently and move on to plan B, or will it be plan C? Maybe it's plan D. I don't know, but I've got another idea. Well, one of the nice things about having a machine shop is when you need a tool, you make a tool. So I'm going to make a custom driver here that I can use with a ratchet or even an impact here to try to remove that screw. So I've got a piece of hex bar here mounted up in the vise. I'm going to machine a slot down the center of this thing, so I want to find the center of the hex. We'll do that here real quick with my edge finder. Well, I have an appropriately sized 4-flute end mill here in the Bridgeport, and we'll go ahead and mill a slot about 100 thousandths deep into this piece of hex. Well, that should be deep enough for this little piece of flat bar, and now I can go ahead and weld these together. Well, I'm going to TIG weld this just to make it a little bit easier on the cleanup. So I've got my prime weld TIG 225. Well, I've had this thing for, geez, I think 5, maybe 6 years, 5 years. Can't quite remember. But we'll go ahead and set this to about 125 amps or so. Before I can weld these together, I want to make sure everything's clean. So I'm just using some acetone and some clean paper towel. I'm going to use one of my homemade fixture clamps here to just hold this together while I tack it in place. Well, these welds aren't going to win any contest, that's for sure, but I'm probably going to use this tool, well, at least twice, one to take apart, one to put together, probably more, because I'm likely to have to take this thing apart, put it back together a few times just to make sure everything's correct. But, you know, just a quick and dirty tool here. This thing is taking me maybe a half an hour total to make. Well, that fits in there really nice, really snug. So I'm going to go ahead and try using my lighter duty impact driver here. I don't want to put more force on this than I have to. And we'll see if we can't get this thing apart. Yeah, it doesn't look like this one's got enough oomph in it to do the trick, so I'm going to have to switch over to the 1/2-inch impact. Well, I lost the footage of me getting that screw out the rest of the way, but it certainly did the trick. So removing here one of the backlash adjustment screws, and that should make it a lot easier for me to withdraw this worm drive from the rotary table. With this worm drive and adapter now out of the base, it's a little easier for me to maneuver this thing and turn it around in order for me to get to the heads of all of these socket head cap screws. So we'll get the rest of these out and take this adapter off. Well, I want to get this mounting screw the rest of the way off of here, so I'm back to the 1/2" impact with my homemade tool inside this socket. And there's another set screw here for the backlash adjustment. Actually, it's a pair of them, and I can take these out now. There's a taper pin here on the end of the shaft that holds the worm on, and I'm just going to knock that out with a punch. Now, I contemplated taking the rest of this apart, which would give me the ability to put it back to the way it was originally from the factory with just a handle without the power feed. And I started to do that, and then I did some research into what it would take to find, the parts I would need to actually do this. And I honestly kind of felt like that was a little bit more than what I wanted to do here. I tried to find the parts, but I just had no luck. So in the end, what I ended up doing was just putting these set screws back into the shaft and leaving it as it is. Well, the next thing to do is to get the table off, and the first step in that is to remove this table lock. It looks like the handle must have been broken or damaged at some point in the past, and someone replaced it with a bolt. I haven't decided yet whether or not I'm going to remake that, but for now, we'll just leave it. Well, next thing here, I'm going to flip this thing up on its side so I can get a look at what is holding the table onto the casting. Well, like many rotary tables, this is held on with a large nut. This big ring here is essentially a nut that screws onto a threaded spindle that's on the bottom of the rotary table. Well, I think if I remove these set screws, I think they're locking the nut onto the thread. If I can remove these, I should be able to back that nut off. Well, this shouldn't be on here too tight, so I think I'm safe in taking a punch here and getting it loose. And it does. It loosens up fairly easily there. And I think I can take this second punch and put it in the other hole and then use them sort of as a manual spanner wrench. I should be able to spin this off. Well, there's a third piece to this besides the base and the table. There's this cylindrical cone that's between the two, and it's captured with this screw. Well, I don't know if I needed to take that screw out in order to get the table out, but I'm just going to use this brass hammer to tap on the table, and that should allow it to come out the top. Well, here's that third piece. It's a tapered bushing split. I'm assuming it's used for adjusting the clamp force or the tightness on the spindle of the table. Well, there's a fair bit of chips on the inside of the table. The surface of the base and the underside of the table have some surface rust on them, but it doesn't look like it's that bad. It feels pretty smooth. There is a little bit of, I don't know, texture to it, but honestly, I don't know if that's scraping from oil, or for oil rather, or if it's pitted from rust. It doesn't look like it's bad enough to be rust pitting, so I have the feeling it is from scraping for oil retention. Well, one last thing I want to look at here is the power feed. Having issues with it only turning in one direction, and I have a feeling that it has something to do with this limit switch. It doesn't move. One side of the plunger is just absolutely stuck, and I have the feeling that there's something wrong with it internally. Well, there's nothing really overly complicated about these things, so I'm going to take it off of this mounting plate that it's on and take a look at the inside of it. And yeah, it kind of looks like those plungers might have some rust on them, and this is why I absolutely hate water-based coolant. I understand why people use it, but man, it just causes so many problems if you don't maintain your equipment. So I have some CRC electrical parts cleaner, and I'm hoping that I can use this along with maybe a little bit of manual intervention here to loosen these up. There are a pair of micro switches that are bolted in here, and that's what activates the limit switch. It's just these two little micro switches. And so I just need to get these little nuts off of the end of them. I'm just using a small pair of pliers. I know I have a nut driver somewhere that will fit this. I just unable to locate it at the moment. So the micro switches themselves look like they're in pretty decent shape here. It's just these plungers. I'm gonna test these here real quick with the power feed plugged in. Well, with the power feed on going in one direction, you can see the gear spinning here. And if I press one of the micro switches, it stops. So that's the limit switch for that way. And if I switch it going the other direction and push the other micro switch, it stops the motor. So the circuitry is all intact. It's really just these plungers. Well, I would imagine it wouldn't be all that hard to get a replacement for one of these, but I think I'm just going to use some penetrating oil and see if I can't just get them loosened up and make this one work. Well, those are completely loosened up now. Those are operating really nice now, so I don't see any reason why I can't reuse this. With all that penetrating oil and everything cleaned out of this enclosure, I think I can go ahead and put this back together. Well, and now that I found the right nut driver, let's go ahead and plug this thing in and see if it's working. Well, nothing wrong with it now, and that just saved me $100, $110 to replace this little switch with a couple of springs in it. Crazy. Well, with the problems with the power feed sorted, I can now go ahead and get this thing cleaned up, as well as all the other parts here. Well, the next step is to get these in the parts cleaner and get them all cleaned up, and then decide if I'm going to paint it or leave the patina. Drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you would do. Would you paint this, or would you leave it as much of the original patina as is left? And I am going to have to make this 2 different videos. There's just too much work here that I had to do to take this apart. So I appreciate you watching. If you're not a subscriber, please consider it. Hit that bell icon. You'll know when I post the follow-up to this one. Thanks to all those that support the channel through PayPal or through Patreon. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.